You're listening to The Reclaimed Life, a podcast about recognizing manipulation, reclaiming your voice, and rebuilding a life that actually feels like your own. I'm Rachel Paxton, an author, ordained chaplain, and certified mental health coach. And each week I'll explore the patterns, dynamics, and turning points that help people rediscover who they truly are. In episode 1, we talked about what it feels like when something starts to feel off. In this episode, we're going to talk about why that can be so hard to recognize while it's happening. We're going to talk about something that many people experience but often don't understand until much later. We're going to explore why manipulation can be so difficult to recognize while it's actually happening. Because one of the most common questions people ask once they begin seeing things more clearly is, how did I not see this sooner? And that question can come with a lot of confusion and sometimes even self-doubt. But what you'll begin to see is that manipulation doesn't work because people are unaware or unintelligent. It works because it's subtle, it's gradual, and it often looks like something else in the beginning. So in this episode, we're going to break that down. We're going to look at how these patterns develop, why they're so easy to miss, and what begins to change when clarity starts to come into focus. One of the biggest misunderstandings about manipulation is the idea that it begins with obvious control. Most people imagine manipulation as something dramatic, but in reality, unhealthy dynamics usually begin in very normal ways. They begin with connection, with trust, with guidance, with friendship, sometimes even with genuine care. And because those early interactions feel positive, people naturally lower their guard. They assume they're in a safe environment, but over time, something subtle begins to change. Guidance becomes pressure, advice becomes criticism, support becomes expectation, and slowly the relationship shifts, not all at once, but gradually. Manipulation works best when it develops slowly. If controlling behavior appeared all at once, most people would immediately recognize it and walk away. Instead, the shift happens in small increments, a comment that feels slightly dismissive, a moment where your perspective is brushed aside, a subtle message that questioning something is somehow inappropriate. At first, those moments may feel small enough to ignore, but over time, they begin to accumulate. And without realizing it, people begin adjusting their behavior to avoid conflict. They speak a little less, they question themselves a little more, and gradually the environment begins shaping their sense of reality. Another reason manipulation is so difficult to recognize is because it often creates confusion. When someone repeatedly challenges your memory, your interpretation, or your emotional reactions, it becomes harder to trust your own perspective. You may hear things like, "You're overthinking," "You're too sensitive," "That's not what happened." And if those responses happen often enough, something important begins to shift internally. Instead of trusting your own experience, you begin wondering whether you misunderstood, whether you imagined something, whether you're the one who is wrong. That kind of confusion can be incredibly disorienting, and it's one of the most powerful tools manipulation relies on. When people begin recognizing manipulation in their lives, they often feel embarrassed or ashamed. They ask themselves why they didn't see it earlier, but manipulation doesn't succeed because people are foolish. It succeeds because people are human. Many manipulative dynamics rely on qualities that are actually very positive: trust, empathy, loyalty, the desire to see the best in others. Those qualities make relationships meaningful, but they often also make it easier for someone to overlook warning signs longer than they otherwise might. In other words, the very qualities that make someone a thoughtful and caring person are often the same qualities manipulation quietly exploits. Eventually, however, something begins to change. A pattern becomes too obvious to ignore. A comment lands differently than it used to. A moment of clarity breaks through the confusion, and suddenly the things that once felt difficult to explain begin making sense. That moment can feel unsettling, but it can also be incredibly empowering. because clarity is the beginning of awareness, and awareness is where reclaiming your life truly begins. If you've ever looked back at a situation and wondered how you didn't recognize manipulation sooner, I hope this episode helps you see that question in a new light. The issue was never a lack of intelligence. Often it was simply that the situation unfolded slowly enough that recognizing the pattern took time. And once that awareness begins, something important happens. You start trusting your own perception again, and that trust becomes one of the first steps towards reclaiming your life. Thank you for listening to The Reclaimed Life. If something in this episode resonated with you, you're not alone. Many people are beginning to recognize unhealthy patterns in relationships, systems, and environments, and discovering that reclaiming their voice is possible. In future episodes, I'll explore topics like recognizing manipulation, understanding narcissistic dynamics, rebuilding self-trust, and learning how to create a life that actually feels like your own. If you'd like to explore more of these ideas, you can visit my website at thereclaimedlifepodcast.com, where I share additional writing, resources, and future episodes of the show. Until next time, take a moment to listen to your intuition, trust what you're beginning to see, and remember that reclaiming your life often begins with one honest question. This is The Reclaimed Life.